The last signal from Saturn reached Earth late on a September night over the hills of Australia. A giant dish caught it, held it for a few seconds, and then lost it forever. Here is the strange part. The spacecraft that sent it was already gone. It had ceased to exist 83 minutes earlier, and its final message was still crossing space, alone. No accident caused this. Nothing broke. The people who built this machine destroyed it on purpose, and they did it to protect a place they had only just discovered. Its name was Cassini. So why did its own team choose to end it? And what did it say on the way down? To find out, you follow its last signal all the way home. Over the next 20 minutes, you will watch a machine grow from a courtroom argument into the most devoted explorer Saturn has ever had. You will see the discovery that quietly became its death sentence. And at the end, you will ride the last signal itself. Not a metaphor. A real journey with a real clock running. It is stranger than you expect. The story starts before the spacecraft existed. It starts with people carrying signs outside a launch site in Florida. It was October 1997. On the pad, a rocket stood ready, carrying one of the heaviest interplanetary probes ever built. And inside that probe sat 72 pounds of plutonium fuel. Not as a weapon, as a battery. Sunlight at Saturn is about 100 times weaker than here, far too faint for solar panels of that era. So Cassini would run on slowly decaying plutonium in devices called radioisotope generators. Protesters feared a launch failure would scatter that fuel into the sky. Engineers answered with iridium shells and impact tests. A court heard the case. The launch went ahead. And on October 15th, before dawn, the argument ended in fire. Cassini left Earth so heavy that no rocket could throw it straight to Saturn. So it cheated. For 7 years, it fell around the solar system, stealing a whisper of speed from whole planets, twice past Venus, once past Earth, once past Jupiter, each pass a slingshot, and the planets none the wiser. The 1999 pass brought it home one last time. Earth swung past, bright and whole, then fell away behind it. It would never be this close again. If you had ridden along through those years, you would have watched the sun shrink from a furnace into a bright, cold star. Most of the journey was silence and patience. Then, in the summer of 2004, Saturn finally filled the window. Cassini burned its engine for over an hour and a half, threaded the gap between two rings, and let the planet catch it. It became the first spacecraft ever to orbit Saturn, and it had arrived carrying a passenger. Bolted to its side rode a sealed disk built by Europe named Huygens. Its target was the one moon that had taunted astronomers for generations. Titan, a world wrapped in orange haze so thick its surface was hidden from every telescope we had. On Christmas Day 2004, Cassini let the disk go. For 3 weeks, Huygens coasted in silence, asleep, falling toward a hidden world. On January 14th, it slammed into that haze. Parachutes bloomed. And for about 2.5 hours, a machine the size of a kiddie pool drifted down through an alien sky, describing everything it felt. It landed with a soft crunch on a floodplain of frozen water, scattered with rounded pebbles of ice. Rounded, the way rivers round stones on Earth. Except the rivers here had been rivers of liquid methane. Stand there for a moment. The sky above you glows a dim burnt orange. The stones under your boots are water ice, frozen so hard they behave like rock. This was the most distant landing ever made. It still is. And it very nearly returned only half a story. Huygens spoke to Earth through Cassini on 2 radio channels, Channel A and Channel B. The pictures were split between them, half down each path, and most measurements flowed down both. Safe on paper. Except one command was never loaded before the descent. Cassini's receiver for Channel A simply never switched on. Every picture sent down that path, roughly 350 of them, vanished into static. Half of everything Huygens saw, gone. One experiment lived on that channel alone, the wind study. Its whole purpose was simple. Watch the probe's radio pitch bend as Titan's winds dragged it sideways. That data never reached Cassini at all. There was, however, one more thread to pull. The probe's whisper did not only go up to Cassini. A trace of it leaked straight past the moon, out into space, toward Earth. And on Earth, giant dishes were listening. Radio telescopes on our planet, more than 1 billion kilometers away, leaned in and caught the faint carrier signal of that little probe whispering under a foreign sky. From that trembling tone, the wind data was rebuilt. Hold on to that image. Giant dishes on Earth, straining to hear the faintest possible signal from Saturn and refusing to let it die. 12 years later, dishes like these would have to do it one last time. With its passenger delivered, Cassini settled into the work it was built for, and Saturn started handing it wonders almost immediately. It watched lightning storms bigger than Earth. It mapped a 6-sided jet stream at the North Pole, a hexagon of wind larger than the whole planet under your feet. Cassini even caught a moon in the act of carving those rings, a speck called Daphnis, plowing its own lane and kicking up walls of ice about 1 kilometer high. The rings are not a painting. They move like weather. Year after year it did this, through more than 100 close passes of Titan alone, sending home nearly 500,000 photographs. Saturn stopped being a bright dot in our sky. It became a place. But the discovery that would seal Cassini's fate came from somewhere far smaller, a place barely anyone was watching. A moon about 500 kilometers across, white as fresh snow, named Enceladus. On paper, the verdict was simple. Too small to hold heat, too old to be active. It should have frozen solid long ago. Then Cassini flew past the moon's south pole, and the spacecraft's instruments flinched. Something was bending Saturn's magnetic field around this little moon. Something was coming off it. The cameras turned back with the sun behind the moon. And there they were. Geysers. Curtains of ice crystals, blasting out of blue fractures in the South Pole, feeding a faint ring of Saturn itself. A dead moon does not breathe. So Cassini was steered straight through the plume, again and again, tasting it in flight. Picture that pass. You are moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour through falling snow, except every flake around you froze out of an ocean no human has ever seen. The taste came back rich. Water vapor, salts, silica grains of the kind that form in hot water, simple carbon molecules, and molecular hydrogen, the same chemical meal that feeds life at deep sea vents on Earth. Put together, the readings said this. Under that white shell sits a global ocean of salty liquid water warmed by hot rock, stocked with organic chemistry. That much is established. Whether anything swims there is a completely open question. It is one of the most hopeful sentences in planetary science. An ocean with warmth and food more than 1 billion kilometers away. And the moment it was written, somewhere in the paperwork, Cassini's fate quietly changed. Because of a rule most people have never heard of: planetary protection. If a world might host life, you are not allowed to contaminate it with ours. Not even by accident. Especially not by accident. And Cassini had a problem. It launched in 1997, before anyone knew Enceladus was alive inside. It was never sterilized. Hardy Earth microbes could plausibly still be riding it, dormant, patient. So here is the irony that runs through the rest of this story. The discovery Cassini is remembered for, and the discovery that signed its death warrant, are one and the same. For a while, the problem stayed theoretical. The mission was extended once, then again. The machine stayed healthy. Only one gauge kept creeping down, year after year: the fuel. Cassini left Earth with 3 tons of propellant. By early 2017, less than 1% of it remained. And a spacecraft without fuel cannot steer. It can only drift. Let it drift, and over decades Saturn's moons would tug its orbit out of shape until one day, on nobody's schedule, it would fall. The odds said it might fall on Titan, or on Enceladus. Onto the ocean you just saw breathing. An unsterilized machine wrapped around plutonium, crashing into the one water world we most want to test for life. The team refused to leave that to chance, and the rules would not have let them anyway. The team weighed the exits. Park it in a distant orbit? Decades of drift risk, just slower. Fire it out of the system entirely? Not enough fuel left. Crash it into Titan? Same contamination problem, different address. One option remained: steer it, while steering was still possible, into Saturn itself. The atmosphere would do what no clean room could: total sterilization by fire. Nothing survives. Nothing contaminates. It is tempting, at this point, to talk about the spacecraft as if it were alive. It was not. Aluminum, wiring, and code, nothing more. But every choice about it was made by people. And people are not aluminum. Some of those people had spent their entire working lives on this one machine. They signed the plan anyway. And being scientists, they refused to let a funeral go to waste. Because between Saturn's cloud tops and the innermost edge of its rings, there is a gap. A clean, silent corridor about 2,000 kilometers wide. In 13 years of orbiting, Cassini had never once dared to enter it. No spacecraft ever had. The ending they designed sent it there 22 times. They called it the grand finale. A dying machine, spending its last fuel on the boldest flying of its life. Nobody knew if the corridor was truly empty. A single sand grain of ring ice at those speeds hits like a rifle round. So on the riskiest first passes, the team turned the big dish antenna forward and used it as a shield. Think about that arrangement. On those shielded dives, the spacecraft had to point its voice away from home. It went through the gap silent, alone, and only turned back afterward to tell us it had survived. The corridor turned out to be almost perfectly clean, and the science from inside it rewrote the textbooks one more time. Flying that close, Cassini could finally weigh the rings, and the answer caught everyone off guard. The readings point to rings far younger than Saturn itself, perhaps only tens of millions of years old. If that holds, the rings you have been watching all this time may be younger than the dinosaurs. The number is still being debated. And from inside the rings, it finally read Saturn's compass. The result was odd. The magnetic field sits almost perfectly in line with the planet's spin, so perfectly that our best theories say it should not be possible. One more riddle logged in its final months. All through those months, one date sat unmoved at the bottom of every schedule: September 15th, the day the corridor flying would end, because the mission would. The path to that day was locked 4 days earlier by an old friend. On September 11th, Cassini passed Titan one final time at a polite distance. Navigators called it the goodbye kiss. Titan's gravity gave the orbit one last gentle bend. Down. After that nudge, the mathematics closed like a door. Even at full thrust, the remaining fuel could never lift the path out of Saturn's atmosphere again. From that moment on, the ending was not a plan. It was physics. 4 days of falling, with work scheduled for every hour of it. On September 14th, Cassini turned its cameras towards Saturn one last time and took a picture of its own grave. The frame shows Saturn's night side, lit softly from above by light bouncing off the rings, ring shine, and near the center of that glow sits the exact patch of cloud where, hours later, the spacecraft would cease to exist. Then the cameras were commanded off. For good. Not for drama, for bandwidth. Every last bit of the radio link was needed for something better than pictures. So let this be said plainly, because the internet keeps inventing it. There is no photograph of Cassini burning. there never was. The last image is the quiet one you just saw, taken more than half a day before the end. What replaced the cameras was, in a way, a promotion. For its final hours, Cassini was reconfigured into something it had never been. An atmospheric probe, tasting Saturn directly, reporting live. 20 years of engineering, ending as a weather balloon in the atmosphere of a giant planet. Live at 27 kilobits per second. Slower than a dial-up modem, carrying the only direct taste of Saturn humanity has ever had. In Pasadena, it was still the middle of the night. At the laboratory that had flown Cassini for 2 decades, the room filled up anyway. Engineers, scientists, their families. People who had given this machine 20 years stood shoulder to shoulder, watching a green trace on a screen. That trace was the radio carrier, a 20-watt whisper about the power of a refrigerator bulb crossing 1.4 billion kilometers of nothing. As long as the line stayed up, Cassini was alive. Here the clock split in two, and you need both to understand this morning. There is the time things happen at Saturn, and there is the time, 83 minutes and 45 seconds later, when Earth finds out. At Saturn, just after 10:30 in the morning, Universal Time, Cassini touched the top of the atmosphere at 113,000 kilometers per hour. New York to London in under 3 minutes. It did not tumble. Not yet. Small thrusters began firing in rapid pulses, fighting the thickening air for one thing only: to keep the antenna pointed at Earth, to keep talking. Its whole final minute was one long act of aiming. The air pressed harder. The thrusters answered 10%, 50, 100. And all the while, a machine built for the vacuum of space flew steady inside a hurricane of hydrogen. Then the air won. The thrusters hit their limits. The spacecraft began to turn, and the antenna's invisible thread to Earth stretched, thinned, and snapped. Within seconds, friction did the rest. The machine that mapped a planetary system for 13 years broke apart, flared, and dissolved into the sky it was studying. The sky folded over it and told no one. And on Earth, nothing happened. The green trace glowed on, steady and calm. The room watched a spacecraft that no longer existed, and nobody there had any way of knowing, because the news was still in transit. Somewhere between Saturn and here, spread across the dark, the last 83 minutes of Cassini's life were traveling as radio waves. The machine was gone. Its voice was not. Ride along with it. You leave the wreck behind at the speed of light. Saturn shrinks to a marble. The rings close into a thin, bright line, and then a point. You cross the orbit of moon after moon in silence. Behind you, the planet keeps a secret Earth does not yet know. Ahead of you, a blue spark grows out of the black. You are carrying the readings of the final minute, the chemistry of Saturn's sky, the pulse of its magnetic field, the last measurements of a mission that refused to stop measuring. And 83 minutes and 45 seconds after the spacecraft died, you arrive. A 70-meter dish in Australia, the same continent that once rescued Huygens' whisper, tilts its face to Saturn and takes the handoff. At 11:55 Universal Time, the main carrier faltered and dropped. A second, fainter channel flickered for a few seconds more, as the tumbling antenna's beam swept past Earth one final time. Then it too faded into the static between stars. In Pasadena, the green trace went flat. The room fell completely silent, and the project manager's voice came over the loop. I hope you're all deeply proud of this amazing accomplishment. Congratulations to you all. This has been an incredible mission, an incredible spacecraft, and you're all an incredible team. I'm going to call this the end of mission. There was applause, the quiet kind. Then embraces and handshakes and tears that people had promised themselves they would not cry over aluminum and wiring. The spacecraft's operations chief, who had kept it healthy for years, put it simply, I no longer have a spacecraft that will keep me up at night. After a few days, I think I'll really miss that. So, the question this story opened with, what did Cassini actually say at the end? The honest answer is the best one. Its last words were not words at all. The final packet our machines decoded came from its magnetometer, a measurement of Saturn's magnetic field taken from inside Saturn's own sky. It was doing science to its very last second, because that is all it ever did. No farewell message, no poetry, a number describing a magnetic field. And honestly, I keep coming back to this from a machine that is more moving than any goodbye could have been. The mission ended that morning. The data never did. Scientists are still mining what Cassini sent home, thousands of studies deep, and the archive keeps answering questions nobody had even thought to ask in 2017. Mission teams today design spacecraft whose entire purpose is to go back to Enceladus and Titan and ask the question Cassini could only raise. Is anyone home? Those future missions will owe a debt to a machine that was ended carefully. The death you just watched was not a loss of control. It was the deepest act of care in the whole 20 years. One more thing. 4 years before the end, Cassini turned away from its work and pointed its cameras at a pale dot beneath the rings, Earth. And for the first time in history, humanity was told in advance, your picture is being taken from Saturn. Look up. Thousands of people walked outside that day and smiled at the sky. If you were anywhere on this planet on July 19th, 2013, then somewhere inside that single pale pixel, there is you. That is what the signals were for. 20 years of them, ending with one that outlived its sender. Not goodbye. Something better. Look what I found. Somewhere out there, the next story is already unfolding. And one of those stories is already nearly half a century long. Two machines, older than most of us, still whispering home from beyond every planet we know. That story is next on the channel, the loneliest signal we have.